All right, so let's finish up the Archean. So remember, the Precambrian itself is about 4 billion years long. It's 87% of Earth's time. Remember, we divide up the Precambrian to the Archean and the Proterozoic. So this is where we are looking at the Archean. Remember, the Precambrian itself is not very well understood. There are quite a few Precambrian rocks out there. That's everything here in tan. But we've got to realize that they're not in very convenient places. Most of these places are covered either by rainforest, by ice, or by social unrest. So these are just not very convenient places. We can study Precambrian rocks fairly easily in Canada and Australia. So those are the two places that we really tend to go to easily see some Precambrian rocks. But again, we don't have a whole lot of it. And of course, we don't really find too many fossils in the Precambrian rocks, so it makes it just a little bit harder to understand. If we take a look at our continental anatomy, we have to realize that North America did not always look like this at all. Remember, our continents grow right through collisions. So if we want to go back and see what the original continent looked like, the original old part of the continent is what we call the craton. So the craton is all of this, right, outlined here, right, in this green and orange. Right, this is the craton. I want you to notice I included Greenland in there because Greenland, I think you can see if you trace this out and trace this out, used to be attached to North America. Okay, it was a part of North America. It broke off actually not that long ago. So this is what the original shape of North America looked like. We added everything else in yellow there much later. Now, when that craton is exposed at the surface, meaning you can go have a picnic lunch on that old rock, we call that the shield. Okay, so the shield is where the old rock is exposed. If the old rock is buried, again, I want you to think of the Grand Canyon. Old rock is there, it's just at the bottom. It's buried by all that other sediment. We call that the platform. So the shield here is represented by orange and the platform by green. So of course, as I mentioned, we grew North America by collisions, and we're really going to get into this in the next section. That's really when we start truly growing a significant portion of the continent. So we're going to see how this shield and how this platform come together. But about 4 billion years ago, we know that's when we start to see plate tectonics, right? Their surface had cooled enough that we start to see plate tectonics, right? We start subducting that komatiite crust and making that switch to the ocean and continental crust. Of course, once plate tectonics is in process, right, once it's going, it's not going to stop, which again is definitely going to change the face of the planet. Those microcontinents are going to get bigger, right, turn into larger continents. And of course, right, we're going to see lots of volcanic arcs, lots of volcanoes. Two major kinds of rocks that we see in the Archean craton are granulites and greenstones. Both of these are metamorphosed rocks. Both of these are rocks that form in subduction zones. Okay, so granulites form as we have a partially melted crust, right, with sediment caught up in a subduction zone. Okay, so here we've got partially melted crust, right, from subduction, collected with the sediment. Metamorphism, right, that's happening in the subduction zone turns into granulite. And say, well, how does that get brought back up to the surface? Remember, once subduction starts, it doesn't mean it can't stop, right? So those rocks can easily get brought back up to the surface. A greenstone forms, right, as we have usually a pillow basalt, right, pillow structure that forms underwater that gets stuck in a subduction zone and it metamorphoses and gets brought back up to the surface. So one key thing here to realize is both of these are indicators for sure that plate tectonics is happening. We have active subduction at this point. We do have life in the Archean, which is kind of hard to believe that there could be life in such a hostile world. Our oldest living thing on the planet are stromatolites. Stromatolites are blue-green algae built up with cyanobacteria, right, all together. They're still around today, which really amazes me. These are living stromatolites in Australia. in Shark's Bay. I know they don't look very exciting, but essentially this blue-green algae cements the sediment together, and it kind of builds a platform that the algae can continue to grow up on. It lives in the intertidal zone, so part of the day it's submerged, part of the day it's exposed, which today, of course, there's a lot of animals that will eat the heck out of a stromatolite. But this is our greatest of grandfathers. Our oldest stromatolite, I think we can push this back a little bit further now with new data, maybe I believe to about 3.8 billion years. Anything past that gets a little bit iffy, and paleontologists, we all like to argue. But our oldest unquestionable stromatolites are around that age. And what's interesting is modern stromatolites literally look exactly like the fossil stromatolites. So it's really, really pretty neat. So what are the things that those stromatolites, that algae needed to survive? Well, there's only real 4 essential components of life. First, you got to have protein, right? You've got to have that amino acid that's going to make that protein, which of course we learned that's coming from those carbonaceous chondrites. You got to have nucleic acid, right? DNA, RNA, right? You got to have DNA, so that way you've essentially got your blueprint, but you also need to replicate yourself. Remember, early life is not going to be, it's all going to be asexual reproduction, so it needs to be able to make copies of itself. Those cells need energy, right? Organic phosphorus compounds that are lovely for an ATP, right? Those cells need energy to be able to do all of this magical stuff. And of course, most basically, you got to have a cell membrane to keep it all together, right? So, we really only need these 4 things in order to have life. And with that, that wraps up the Archean. So from here, we're going to head into Chapter 9, which Chapter 9 moves into the next section of the Precambrian, which is going to be a little bit different, more geology dominated, but we are going to see some pretty exciting things.